What's going on YouTube? It's Garrett coming at you with another video about life in Japan. Before moving to a new place, you kind of have a romanticized notion or sort of a dream or an expectation that you would generally have about what your life would be like in this next place. You know, it's kind of that complex of the grass is always greener on the other side. Personally, myself, before moving to Japan, I too had my own set of mixed assumptions. Now, after the past 3 years, I've been able to see a lot of things clear firsthand through my own experiences and through just simply being a part of the everyday life cycle. You as the viewer who may be interested in living in Japan, or maybe simply you just want to confirm if some of these generalizations are true or to what extent are they true. That's what today's video is going to cover. I hope you enjoy. Let's get into it. So before moving to Japan, probably the biggest overgeneralized expectation that I had was that living in Japan would make me fluent in Japanese immediately. I don't know what I was thinking. I basically moved to Japan with a very basic set of Japanese skills. I hadn't grown up speaking or learning Japanese throughout my childhood. Like, I never really put serious study and time and effort into the Japanese language until I moved to Japan. There's some truth to the fact that you're gonna be forced to use Japanese in many predicaments. From reading and writing and doing all these things, naturally it's going to accelerate the language progression. But let me tell you that it's 3 years later and I'm still nowhere near fluent in Japanese. The first 2 years where I was working in Japanese public schools in a Japanese environment, my Japanese definitely skyrocketed. Yes, it's true that being in that environment forced me to have to study harder just in order to simply communicate. I cannot deny that it had a great impact, but you gotta be careful. After the 2 years of working in the Japanese public schools, the following year, I worked at an international school. Immediately after that, like all of my coworkers and my colleagues, other teachers, yeah, everything was done in English. Because you're in this international school bubble, you don't really have to speak Japanese anymore. My Japanese language that went up immediately started to just tank. Living in Japan will make you fluent in Japanese. That is definitely not the case if you're not willing to put in the work. Also, if you're not exposed and immersed in a Japanese language environment for the majority of your everyday life. It's a step-by-step journey to fluency. It doesn't come overnight, but living here is not just going to simply, ta-da, okay, I'm fluent now. My next sort of misconception that I had was that Japanese public transportation is always on time. Now hold on, before you start freaking out and saying, whoa, dude, what are you talking about? Shinkansen's top tier. Totally. I get it. I used to live in New York. I took the MTA. Don't even talk about San Francisco Bay and the god-awful BART. I get it. Their train systems especially are unrivaled to anywhere else that I've ever been. The bus system, that's another story. Especially when I lived out more on the countryside and the outskirts, not central Tokyo, but I was living in Chiba. I would always rely on the bus. And let me tell you, the bus, it would be 10 minutes late. Sometimes it would be 20 minutes late. Sometimes it would be 45 minutes late. It's not necessarily the bus driver or the bus's fault. I blame it more on the infrastructure of Japan's suburban layouts. Once you start getting into these smaller towns or these smaller cities, you'll notice everything is so jam-packed together. You have houses, you have buildings, and you have a bunch of cars using one main street. There's not multiple lanes. And the difficulty with that is you get some monster traffic jams. And you mix that in with the fact that a lot of these streets also cross paths with the train lines generally. A lot of the train lines are pretty frequent. These trains that are coming in and out, in and out, in and out every 10 or 15 minutes. You can only imagine how much of a disaster some of these bus drivers face trying to make their way to each bus stop in an orderly manner. So there's just a whole bunch of different factors that go into why the bus is late. It was definitely something that caught me off guard the first time I was trying to take the bus to go to meet with a friend in the city, and I told him, hey man, I'm sorry, I'm gonna be 40 minutes late because the bus isn't here yet and I don't know where it is. As I started to live in the area more and take the bus more and more, I started to realize this was a general consistent in frequency. And so just to remember that overall, yes, it is true. The Japanese public transportation system regarding the trains and the Shinkansens, those are going to be on point. However, once you start using the buses, especially during that rush hour time period, try to be there as early as possible to ensure that you won't accidentally be late. And this next one is, I feel a little insecure about this one, but it's all good. I had a misconception that it was impossible to get fat in Japan. That is totally false. For some reason, I would always see Japanese people in generally, for the most part, in comparison to America, where I'm from. Yeah, you're not gonna see as many obese people. Most of the jobs in Japan, most people don't usually use cars. They will walk, they will bike, they will use the train. I do believe people are able to live a little bit more of a balanced, active lifestyle in that aspect, but you can totally get fat in Japan. Personally, when I first came here, in the first year, I was probably one of the lowest body fat percentages I had ever been in my entire life. A lot of the foods out here have a lot less preservatives, fresher quality produce. I was on a diet back then of eggs and natto. This was when I was simply just living almost as like a hermit. Go to work, come home, study Japanese, maybe I'd work out, go for a run. I had like this very structured, healthy routine. But once I started to stray from that sort of routine, and then I started to go out, explore beer again, since Japan has a really diverse, growing beer scene out here, I started to get really stressed out from work. And after work, on the way out, you just have a bakery that's positioned right outside of the train station, and you just had a stressful ass fucking day. It's just so easy. You walk out and you can just smell the fresh bread, and it just drags you in and gives you a hug and says, don't worry about that day. Or, you know, on the way back home, you're walking and you see a convenience store, and then of course, convenience store is gonna have all the luxuries, all the snacks that you once dreamed about coming to Japan and eating, except now you can eat those every day. And so yeah, probably in that second to third year, I gained back all my weight that I had originally lost, and maybe even more. But currently right now, I am actually trying to tackle off some weight which I gained from working at the international school last year. Trust me when I say that that was high stress. And I remember the biggest indication for me was when my hairstylist, he has been cutting my hair for like the past 2-ish years. The last time I got a haircut about like 2 months ago, he cut my hair and he just was like very blunt about it. He was just like, oh wow, you're so fat now. And I guess I hadn't really taken a good look at myself in the mirror, because at the time I was in my last month working at the international school, and I had gone through so much crap and so many different pastries and so many different after work beers. It was an indication to me like, oh wow, okay, I really have to start thinking more responsibly about my health. With that being said, if you live in Japan, be careful. It is not impossible to gain weight out here. And last but not least, this one is more of a personal realization that I had, which was, for me as a Japanese American, I had this thought in my mind that Japan was the country of my roots. And a lot of you are going to say, wait a minute, yes it is, what are you talking about? And even in my answers that I tell people when they say, why did you move to Japan? The easiest answer I could find, especially for Japanese people in Japanese, is, I'm searching for my culture, my Japanese roots. But I remember before I moved to Japan, I have a good family friend who's devoted his entire life's work to the Japanese American community back in San Francisco. In fact, without him, I don't think San Francisco would even have the Japantown that it does have today. And this family friend of mine, the day I found out I was gonna move to Japan, I remember I told him, I'm so excited to get back in touch with my roots. And he sent me a message back, which was more or less, I'm excited to hear you're going to Japan, kick some ass. However, Japan is not the country of your roots. America is. Don't ever forget that. And I remember at the time when he told me that, and especially in an email, it felt so blunt. I remember I was actually kind of offended by that message. Like, I was like, Japan is the country of my roots. How dare you tell me that it isn't otherwise? 3 years later, now that I've lived here, I think I know exactly what he was talking about. And there's no denying that Japan was my country where my ancestors came from. But my mind and my way of thinking, they all stem from the roots from American society. I was born and raised in America. I went to school in America. And of course, there were Japanese cultural customs which were embedded within this structure. But at the core, my way of thinking and my way, where I was born, where I was rooted was the San Francisco Bay Area. I wasn't born in Japan, and I didn't grow in Japan. I grew up in America. And just thinking about that now as a Japanese American today and sort of reshaping my identity of who I am, I'm starting to gain less of the uncertainty. I have this acceptance, and now I'm able to see the reality of what it is exactly that my family friend was telling me about, that he had sort of foreshadowed before this journey was presented in front of me. I'm grateful that he actually sent that email, because now I can understand that with better clarity and know that that was definitely not a diss. That was a sense of endearment and a sense of him telling me to be proud of being an American. Hold pride in that. And so with that being said, those were generally the most significant things that I could come up with. Expected overgeneralizations and misconceptions that I had before coming to Japan and sort of learning through the process of living here. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you like this kind of content, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Otherwise, if you stuck around for this long, thank you so much, and I will see you next time. Peace.